there's a very specific sound some people love more than almost anything else. Not music, not laughter, not applause. It's the click of their own front door locking behind them at the end of the day. The moment the outside world officially stops being their problem. If you've ever felt a wave of relief that strong just from closing a door, you already know this isn't laziness. It isn't fear. It isn't some failure to put yourself out there. It's something your nervous system has been trying to tell you for years. And most of the people around you have never once had to listen to that same signal because their wiring simply doesn't send it. Today, I want to walk you through what's actually happening psychologically inside people who genuinely prefer staying home, not as a consolation prize, not as a phase, not as something to grow out of, but as a legitimate, wired-in way of experiencing the world. By the end of this, you're either going to understand yourself a lot better, or you're going to understand someone you love a lot better. Either way, stay to the end. The last section is the part almost nobody says out loud, and it's the one that actually explains all the rest. Part 1. The myth you were handed first, somewhere early on. Most of us absorb the same quiet lesson. Home is the fallback. Home is what you settle for when nothing better came up. Going out is living. Staying in is missing out. Nobody sits you down and says this directly. It shows up sideways, in the friend who asks, "You're staying in again?" Like it's a diagnosis. In the family member who checks if you're okay because you didn't come to the thing. In the endless stream of other people's Saturday nights on your phone, curated to look like proof that everyone else figured out the secret to being alive, and you're the only one who missed the memo. So you try the thing culture tells you to try. You go to the party. You accept the invitation you didn't want. You tell yourself that if you just push through the discomfort enough times, it'll eventually click the way it seems to click for everyone else. And here's the part almost nobody prepares you for. Sometimes it never clicks. Not because something is wrong with you. Because you were trying to solve the wrong equation the whole time. Part 2. Your brain isn't broken. It's just built differently. Here's where it gets interesting, and where a lot of people finally exhale for the first time. The preference for staying home isn't a personality flaw dressed up in therapy language. It's a measurable difference in how certain nervous systems are wired. Personality neuroscience has found that people who lean introverted tend to show more baseline activity in the frontal cortex, the region tied to internal thought, planning, and reflection. In plain terms, their brains are already busy, already running, already generating rich internal material before anything from the outside world even shows up. External stimulation doesn't add to that experience so much as it competes with it. Compare that to a more externally oriented nervous system. One that's genuinely energized by noise, crowds, and constant novelty. Neither system is better. They're just tuned to different frequencies. One recharges by taking energy in from the world. The other recharges by turning down the volume on the world and letting its own internal signal come through clearly. The problem isn't having the quieter kind of nervous system. The problem is spending years trying to run it on the other system's fuel. Part 3. I love my friends. I just don't want to see them that often. This is the sentence that confuses almost everyone who doesn't share this wiring. And it's worth sitting with because it sounds like a contradiction and isn't one. Loving someone and being drained by spending time with them are not opposites. They can both be completely true at the same time. Socializing, even with people you genuinely adore, costs a certain kind of energy for a person whose nervous system processes external interaction as effortful work. That cost isn't emotional distance. It's closer to a battery being used, and batteries need to recharge before the next task, regardless of how much you liked the last one. This is why, after a good night out with people they love, some people still come home and feel completely wrung out, not sad, not regretful, just tapped. And the recovery that follows, hours or a whole day of quiet, isn't a malfunction. It's the nervous system doing exactly the job it's supposed to do. Returning to baseline. Part 4. What home actually is. When it's not a fallback culture, treats staying home as an empty category. The absence of plans, the thing that happens when nothing else is happening. But for people who genuinely prefer it, home isn't absence at all. It's presence, just of a different kind. It's control over noise, lighting, pace, and stimulation. It's not having to perform a slightly adjusted version of yourself for whoever happens to be in the room. It's following your own rhythm instead of constantly recalibrating to somebody else's energy, timing, or expectations. Here's the distinction most outsiders miss entirely. These people don't hate going out. Many of them enjoy it in the right dose, with the right people, on their own terms. What they actually resist is the pressure to go out. The implicit accusation that choosing solitude means choosing a smaller life. They're not rejecting connection. They're rejecting the idea that connection only counts if it's loud, frequent, and witnessed by other people. Part 5. The 4 stages. Every quiet person quietly goes through. If this describes you, you've probably lived through some version of this sequence without ever naming it. Stage 1. Accommodation. Maybe I'm being too rigid. Maybe if I push myself harder, I'll enjoy this the way everyone else seems to. Stage 2. Guilt. What's wrong with me that I don't want what everyone else wants? Stage 3. Resentment. Why can't people just accept that I'm different instead of treating it like a problem to fix? Stage 4. Acceptance. This is simply how I'm built. That 4th stage is where the real shift happens. Not in behavior, which barely changes, but in relationship to the behavior. Staying home stops being a shameful secret you owe people an explanation for, and starts being a preference as unremarkable as liking tea over coffee. The guilt doesn't vanish overnight. It's been reinforced by years of cultural messaging that treats socializing as virtue and solitude as a symptoms. But slowly, the internal script flips from I should want to go out to I'm allowed to want to stay in. That single flip is worth more than almost anything else in this video. Part 6. Why this feels like a fight against belonging itself. Humans are taught from very early on that fitting in equals belonging. Doing what the group does is how you prove you're normal, connected, safe. So when someone consistently chooses differently, even when that choice makes them visibly calmer and happier, a quiet, persistent question tends to surface. Am I missing something everyone else understands? That question doesn't stay internal for long. It gets reinforced from the outside constantly. The friend who says, "You never come out anymore." The relative who asks if you're okay because you seem isolated. The algorithm feeding you a highlight reel of everyone else's social calendar. The tension isn't really between wanting to be alone and wanting company. It's between genuine contentment on one side and a cultural chorus insisting that contentment doesn't count unless it's loud and social on the other. Research on personality and well-being consistently shows something that should end this debate outright. People who structure their lives around what actually energizes them, rather than what they think should energize them, report higher satisfaction, lower anxiety, and a stronger sense of identity. Not because solitude is superior, because alignment is. Part 7. This isn't avoidance, it's selectivity. Here's a reframe worth sitting with. People who prefer staying home aren't avoiding life. They're being selective about which parts of life actually add something to them versus which parts just take something away. You can be physically present at 100 events and emotionally checked out of every single one. Or you can be home alone, fully present with a book, a project, a thought you're finally getting to finish. And that second option, for a certain kind of nervous system, is where meaning actually shows up. Presence beats participation. Depth beats attendance. This isn't a rationalization. It's just a different definition of what counts as a full life. And there's a second layer to this that rarely gets said out loud. Preferring solitude often correlates with investing more deeply in fewer relationships, not less. Depth requires processing time, and processing time requires space. People who go quiet after socializings aren't withdrawing from the relationship. They're digesting it so that the next round of connection has more substance behind it. Part 8. The cost of absorbing experiences instead of skimming them, one detail that almost never gets discussed. People who prefer solitude are often unusually thoughtful processors. They don't just experience an event. They absorb it, replay it, extract meaning from it afterward. That depth is exactly why they need recovery time that other people don't seem to need. Someone who moves lightly across the surface of experiences can go from event to event without much depletion, because there's not much being processed underneath. Someone who takes things in deeply, who reflects and integrates rather than skims, needs space between inputs the way a muscle needs rest between reps. The very trait that makes someone insightful, perceptive, a good listener, is the same trait that makes non-stop socializing unsustainable for them. That quiet time doesn't go to waste either. It usually gets redirected into things that matter: creative work, learning, reflection, craft. Psychologists call this intrinsic motivation, doing something because it's genuinely engaging, not because it earns anyone's approval. People who embrace this tend to develop unusually rich internal worlds. More self-aware, more attuned to their own thoughts, less dependent on external input, to feel like their time was well spent. Part 9. The loneliness that has nothing to do with being alone. Here's the part that rarely gets said, and it's the part I promised at the start would tie everything together. The hardest part of this experience usually isn't the solitude itself. It's the loneliness of being misunderstood while enjoying that solitude. It's knowing your choice is the right one for you, feeling genuinely at peace with it, and still having to brace for the question, the raised eyebrow, the "are you okay?" that assumes something must be wrong. Culture is loud about celebrating busy calendars and wide friend circles. It's almost silent about validating a quiet life, about telling someone it's fine to prefer their own company, to find fulfillment somewhere that doesn't involve constant company. So the grief some people carry isn't grief over a social life they're missing. It's grief over the acceptance they never got. The simple ability to say, "I'm staying in tonight," without it being treated as a red flag instead of a preference. This is the root underneath everything else in this video. Every sign, every pattern, every stage of that four-part cycle traces back to this same tension. A nervous system that's telling the truth, up against a culture that's only built to hear one kind of answer. The closing truth, if any part of this felt like it was describing you, here's what's worth holding on to. Preferring to stay home isn't stagnation. It isn't avoidance. It isn't a smaller life dressed up to look intentional. Growth for a nervous system like this. So, 2026, rarely looks like constantly pushing past your comfort zone the way it's usually described. It looks like learning to trust your own needs even when they don't match everyone else's, and building a life around what actually works instead of what looks impressive from the outside. You don't owe anyone an explanation for locking the door and staying in. You don't owe anyone a defense of a preference that costs no one anything except your presence at events you never wanted to attend in the first place. The people who matter will understand the quiet. Everyone else was never the audience this life was for, quieter than the world expects, fuller than it looks from the outside, not broken, just honest. If this described you, or someone you love, tell me in the comments which part hit hardest. And if you know someone who spent years apologizing for wanting a quiet Friday night, send them this video. They've probably never heard it explained back to them this clearly. I'll see you in the next one.